You're listening to the Precision Shooting Podcast, discussing all aspects of precision and long-range rifle shooting. This episode is brought to you by Impact Dynamics, advanced training for the precision shooter. And now, over to your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to the Precision Shooting Podcast. This is episode number 13. And tonight it's myself, Rusty, and Andrew.
How you doing, Sam?
Yeah, pretty good, mate. And yourself?
Not too bad, all things considered. Not too bad, yep.
Good to hear. You heard you dropped some a fairly heavy weight on your fingers.
Yeah, that kind of put me out of action for a little bit, but no, all good.
All back on deck? Yeah, nice.
Yep.
So it's just the two of us tonight. We the other guys have not been able to make it in for various reasons. But we thought we'd press ahead and cover a few topics and talk about a couple of things. And I guess I went shooting on the weekend, which was really good fun. We actually went and did some testing for the Precision Rifle Invitational, which was good, but slightly eye-opening to actually run through some of the stages from concept form to actually practically doing them. Some of them stayed the same, some of them have changed, and one has been ditched completely, which I guess you got to do.
Yeah, I mean that's we want to make sure that when the shoot comes around, we've got it sort of finalised and polished. So I haven't been shooting, however, I have been making contraptions and devices for the shooters that will be competing. So they'll hate me, I'm sure. It
performed very, very well. And I guess what was interesting, the one that we did drop was not based on it was being a bad concept of stage design. It was actually dropped because I'm not convinced that we could faithfully score it correctly. It would be up for debate, and that's the consideration I hadn't had prior to actually going and shooting it. So
that was one of those stages that 1 or 2 points could mean the difference between placing. So
certainly, absolutely. But speaking of competitions and other such things, we had last episode was Jared from the Victorian Practical Rifle series, and I tell you what, he was nervous about coming on the show, but I think he did a really good job, and he's involved with the Victorian Practical Rifle series, and they've got their shoot coming up on Sunday, which unfortunately not been able to make it, but I know a few extra guys have been able to, and hopefully a few more can. So if you were umming and ahhing about it on Sunday, it's a public holiday here in SA and also in Victoria. So get out to Castlemaine. He says Castlemaine, but anyway, we'll go with Castlemaine. And get out there and have a shoot on Sunday. And so we will link those guys, but they're easy to find on Facebook, Victorian Practical Rifle Series.
Or even if listeners might not even have the opportunity to actually shoot, just to check out what these guys are doing. And I think it's one of those things that even if you haven't had a lot of experience with long range or precision type shooting, and you might have a preconceived idea of what target shooting is all about, come along and check it out, because it's something very different.
Yeah, certainly.
And it appeals to people that wouldn't normally be into your traditional what people think of target shooting as. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So get out to that one. If you're interested in coming to the Southern Shooters one, it's an invite one, but maybe drop us a message and we'll see what we can swing for you. Now, the other thing that I thought I'd touch on from a previous episode, I think it was number 10 with Nick from Ignition Custom, he talked about a 45-70 Martini action.
Yeah, I believe it was.
A falling block, yeah.
It was a Martini, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and he was putting into a whiskey chassis, KRG whiskey, and I didn't quite, when he was talking about it, I didn't quite grasp the concept about exactly what he was doing. That has been completed now, and the photos are up on Facebook, and it's different.
It is. I've got to say, it looks better than I would have expected hearing about it. Yeah, it actually.
That's true.
He's done a good job on the aesthetics, and from all accounts, I think it'll shoot well, and it's certainly probably the only one in Australia, let alone the world. So.
Yeah, no, it's. I saw it and had to have a few good looks at it because it didn't look like anything I'd seen, and but I know the gentleman who had actually ordered that, and I hope he likes it. I'm sure if he's set out to do something very different, and it certainly fits into that category.
I'd like to see him shoot it at 1,000 yards. I think Sam, that it was a cartridge that was renowned for long range accuracy for a long time.
Yeah, right. Yep.
So it was used in the the early long range shooting. So certainly capable.
I don't think it'd get quite the run it would. It used to then. Now, I'm not sure Greg would be willing to change his build from a 6mm by 47 out to a 45-70, but we could try and convince him.
We can work on it. But
yeah, there's Greg, if you're listening, Berger have released some new 45 cal projectiles that I'm sure would be perfect for exactly what you're after.
Yeah, just contact Berger and they'll fix you up.
Yeah, they'll get straight onto it. It would be perfect. Now I had an interesting situation. Well, no, I'm questioning some things, Andrew, and I thought I'd come to you for some advice, and perhaps hopefully the listeners can learn something along with me. So my 300 Win Mag that I've got that we use for southern shooters and it gets used quite a bit is. I suspect the life of it's getting towards the barrel's getting worn out. Now, I could be making excuses for my poor shooting, which I'm happy to admit if that is the case. But what has happened is over the last 4 or 5 times I've taken it out, the accuracy has not been anywhere near where it has been previously. Both at short range and longer range, and it seems to have progressively dropped off. Now, this rifle has probably had a pretty hard life, the barrel specifically, that it's been used commonly for people who are just getting into it, learning, having a crack, never shot anything that big, and often not getting a lot of breaks between shots and getting quite a hard life. It's probably at an estimate done over 1,000 rounds, and it probably had done about a good 6 or 7, so 500 or 600 rounds prior to actually sort of changing into a precision rifle. It was only getting shot to sort of 300-400 meters, and now it had a load developed for it. It was shooting very quite impressive for what it is. But it now is not grouping consistently. So, I don't know, it's similar to what happened with my 22 to 50 in the way it's gone about, and that a barrel change fixed that immediately. I don't know, what's your thoughts?
Well, I've been there when that rifle's been shot, and again, I would be inclined to agree. Often if you've got an issue, say you've got a mount screw come loose or a defect in the scope where it might be not holding point of impact. Often those issues are, say a loose screw, which I believe you had on that rifle.
At one point it was going really badly, and the rail was loose. So fix that up, and I guess it's improved it to some degree, but not at a long distance. It's not improved it in any shape.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that if I was to sort of have to diagnose an issue like that, I would the first thing I'd look at would be the scope. Now, if you've got a scope of known, accuracy, and you know that scope holds 0, and it pretty quickly rules out physically the mounting setup and that sort of thing. If you've got it all locked down solid and you've got a known scope on there, known load, it sort of cuts a lot of the potential issues out. Now, often I've seen with scopes, if you have an issue with something moving internally in them that shouldn't be, you'll get you might get a group of, say, 3 or 4 in a very tight group and then one thrown out.
Yep.
And then it'll come back to the original group, which is sort of, a sign of something moving from one spot to another, but doing it repeatedly.
Yeah, sure, resting from one side or whatever it may be doing.
Yeah, and this rifle is definitely not doing that.
No,
and,
it's so I took it out and shot on paper on the weekend, and it was moving in excess of sort of 3-4 inches, and if you shot enough targets, it shot a couple of decent groups. So shot enough rounds, it shot a couple of decent groups, but not from shot 1, 2, and 3. It would be shot 1, 4, and 10, and those 3 went together in a good group. But that was not.
It's probably law of averages, really.
Exactly right. Put enough down there, and something will look impressive. So you just put your finger over the hole and take the photo of the rest. That's the way to do it.
That's the internet way.
Yeah.
No, I mean, we discussed earlier tonight. That gun has fired a reasonable number of rounds. Now, it's a relatively light profile. It's a standard, Remington Sendero profile, which is not particularly heavy. And it sort of got me thinking about, okay, it's fired, say, probably 1,200 at most, I would imagine.
Sure, I wouldn't put it over 1,200.
Yeah. However, what really accelerates a barrel's wear and reduces its life is heat and speed.
Yep.
If you you fire that 1,200 rounds really, and you don't let it get too hot, and you're basically being careful with it, you can extend the barrel life, quite a bit more now, hundreds of rounds more.
Yep.
So for a barrel to get 1,200 rounds, it is a factory barrel. It's not a match barrel.
Correct.
Remington barrels are decent, but compared with a match barrel,
yep,
they're inconsistent to a fair degree. And what I was thinking as well is you probably had your throats probably eroded a relatively large amount. And what you may find is that often factory guns have short magazines and long throats,
yes,
which means you can't really seat the projectile, ideally
as far
close to
as
the rifling.
possible.
So what you may have...
It is a floor plate. Originally it was a floor plate, so that was not such a big deal. And I guess now it is magazine driven now, but I'll probably single load it most of the time anyway. Yeah,
I mean, if you've kept the same load and you haven't adjusted your seating depth and that sort of thing, what you could find would be your throat could well be burnt out to a fairly big degree.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not adjusting your seating depth to suit, you could get really large jumps to the rifling, and obviously the rifling is not going to be clean and neat like it would be on a new barrel. So
yeah, certainly.
That can account for a fair bit of inconsistency.
Yep.
I would say the barrel's probably cooked.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that
yeah,
that's probably it, really.
That's
I mean,
probably where to go. I guess the only thing, or one of the factors I haven't tried, is to change the scope on it, which it doesn't read like a scope problem from my experience, but I'm happy to be wrong on these things.
Yeah, look, I would be, in this case, I'd be very surprised if it was an issue, because that scope has been on other guns. And
it's a Bushnell XRS for those listening.
Yeah, 4.5 to 30. Now, those scopes are solid, and that scope has been on other guns. I've seen it shot. It's been reliable and dependable.
It's always been good. And it's been on this gun for a long time and shot very well on this gun as well.
And as you said, to start with, it's been a progressively worse performer. It hasn't just all of a sudden gone from shooting half MOA to 3 MOA groups.
Yeah.
So that does indicate the barrel and the rifle rather than the scope. Scope issues don't gradually get worse. They normally go from perfect to
terrible,
rubbish.
Absolutely. So I guess and to clarify the reason it was shot quite a bit is it was a gun that we use for new shooters if they wanted to shoot something big in controlled environment, and to be able to it was bought for that intent, and then it slowly became actually part of the more longer range precision side of things. So it probably had a pretty rough upbringing initially, and then and now has sort of paid me back for it, if that is the issue.
Oh, I think it's probably paid for itself. It's and as you said, it's a factory barrel. It's been probably not cleaned as often as it would if you were like really trying to maintain top line accuracy.
Compared to my actual precision rifles, it's not in the same category and that sort of things.
So I think we'll have to work out a new barrel and get it going again.
I'll be interested if anyone has, or those who have worn out barrels, and it's not my first, but for those who have worn out barrels, it'd be interesting to see your take, and if there's other things that I should be trying perhaps before I jump the gun and drop $1,000 on getting a barrel and the work done to make it all happen. I would be curious to hear that. That's probably what I'm gonna have to do, I suspect. But I'm happy to test a couple other things and then be able to give back feedback to those who suggest it as well, to see where that goes. Yeah,
absolutely. I think, given I've seen this rifle as well, and I've seen it over a period of time, I would be quite surprised if it was anything else.
Yep.
But you never know.
No, that's it. Always
stranger things have happened. So.
Always learning. Always happy to be wrong on these sort of things, especially if it saves me $1,000. I'm really happy to be wrong on this one. That would be good. Oh, thanks for the ideas and the input on that one. Now, we were going to talk a little bit about some new products that we'd seen with SHOT happened in January, so now it's a couple of months behind us. EWA's on at the moment, and so there are some new products around, but you've seen some stuff that you wanted to bring up, Andrew?
Yeah, just a couple of things. I thought that, there's thousands of products are released at SHOT Show in the US every year, and EWA, which for people that are not aware, EWA is, I guess, effectively a more upmarket version of SHOT Show held in Europe. I guess it's all sort of a suit and tie kind of thing. But again, it's new products. It's the firearm industry. So there's a few products that I've picked out, Rusty, that that are probably more applicable to sort of the precision sort of long range shooting. And one that really caught my eye is this new product from Caldwell. It's their long range target like camera system. We've spoken about this, I think, touched on it before, the concept of having a camera downrange near your target.
Yeah,
often
absolutely.
it's very difficult to spot fall a shot at long range, and I guess cost has been a fairly prohibitive issue in the past, but it seems that Caldwell have come out with a very reasonably priced, sort of around the $400 mark, I believe, for the system. So very interested to hear what other people sort of, are people interested in this kind of product?
Well, I'd be keen to see if people are using it, because I'm thinking about getting something like this for the longer range stuff. One at where we shoot, and also then for this particular competition. And it'd be really good to have a camera downrange just to alleviate discussion on whether or not someone hit it. And yeah, if you've got it on camera, it's hard to disprove it.
Yeah, and it saves a lot of time. I mean, like you mentioned, in the competition sense, a lot of time having to, close the range, go down range, check targets, and come back up. It's right there. It's flowing. But yeah, even for the guys that aren't, looking at it in a competition sense, it's a very, very handy piece of equipment, I would imagine. And
well, that Caldwell one looks. It claims it'll do up to about up to a mile, and that's full HD video, and that'll stream to any Wi-Fi device, so Android or iPhones or anything like that, which would make it really versatile. Which would be good to see when they do come to Australia, if they do come to Australia. Hopefully they do.
I would imagine so. I mean, I think the majority of the Caldwell products are here, so you'd probably know, Rusty. Who is the distributor? Niola, I believe. Yeah, so yeah, I would imagine they probably will make it here when the market lets up enough in the US that we can get some here. Yeah, and another product which not probably quite so applicable for the tactical orientated shooter, but definitely for the guys that are into the F-class type events. There's a Talon Mark 7 carbon fiber bipod, which is a very wide footprint bipod, predominantly made out of carbon fiber, so obviously very light, strong and stiff, that I think would be very appealing for the F-class guys. I mean, that's what it's specifically designated for, an FTR bipod. So I know for a fact we've got a couple of listeners that are into that kind of shooting. So
yeah, sure. Again,
probably not particularly practical field shooting type orientated, but for the range guys, it's what they want. So
is that excuse my ignorance, but within F class is there weight? There's rate restrictions, isn't there, within F class?
Yeah,
then does a bipod count for that? I don't know.
Well, yeah. One of our F-class shooter listeners maybe could let us know. I'm not an F-class shooter either, but I believe there's not just F-class, there's different areas, and then there's different parameters they have to abide by. So, I mean, guys, for having an ultra lightweight bipod, I would presume that if it's attached to the gun, it's probably considered part of it. So,
part of it, yeah, because I know there is weight limits within various categories, but I'm sure. I don't know whether the bipod counts in that. Well, we'll find out, hopefully.
Yes, yep. So
someone will tell us.
And I guess that the F-class thing leads me into another product, which another manufacturer which I had never heard of up until a couple of days ago, which is their products are being released at EWA currently. Okay. It's Victrix Armaments.
Yeah, I got alerted to that today, and they look pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think they're an Italian manufacturer with some really really good equipment that they're using to manufacture their products. Now, they make every single item on their rifles except their barrels, and they are in partnership with Benchmark Barrels, who are...
That's not bad.
Yeah, top quality barrels.
Yeah, now, absolutely.
You look on their website, they've got state-of-the-art 5-axis machines, and they're...
Now, that's what I saw, and Yeah, just the way they're doing it's obviously reasonably different to how others are.
Well, there's a few things different. They make their own actions, and they use a 3-lug action with some. Their geometry on their lugs is different from, I guess, the standard. And there's.
I had that question. They in their spiel it said 105, 105, 105, versus normally it's a 120, 120, 120. What does that relate to?
I believe that it wasn't all 105. I think there's some different angles, and I think what they've found in their testing is when the action's locked, they found less distortion with the geometry they've used rather than a conventional 3-lug action where all the lugs are evenly spaced apart, like in 120-degree increments.
Right, but that's a spacing on the lugs.
Yeah, the angle of the lugs. Yeah, so. That's there's obviously their proprietary action, so they seem to have done their homework. But regards to what they're actually building those actions into, they've got a good range of they're obviously covering their tactical market in a fairly wide degree, which
quite
is
versatile, aren't they?
Yeah, but then again, what would be of interest to the purely the range target shooters is they've got a really good range of F-class guns, including an ultralight. Carbon fibre stocked version and multitude of conventional, if you could call it that, laminate and solid timber stocked versions as well. So, just something that sort of came up and to me they look really good. So,
yeah, and it'd be interesting to see because they're Italian, which are obviously known for shotguns, but perhaps not so much for precision rifles.
Yeah, I mean. That's sort of, I guess, been the norm, but I mean they've got the manufacturing capability to make some nice gear, and so I mean they're in partnership with March Scopes in the UK, so I've been in contact with them, and hopefully we'll be getting some pricing and availability when EVA's finished. So
that'd be really good to see what they're actually end up being worth.
I mean they're not going to be cheap, I wouldn't imagine,
no,
but
of course not.
They're utilising the top gear, so that was a pretty interesting product.
Yeah, one that I saw, I use a number of the Timney Calvin Elite triggers, which I really like, and they've released a 2-stage variant of it. And I haven't done a lot with 2-stage triggers, but I have used a couple, and they were quite friendly to use. So I don't know whether I'm not going to go change them all, but perhaps the next one I do get, whenever I do get a new one, might try the 2-stage. What's your experience with 2-stage triggers?
I've used a few, and a good 2-stage trigger is nice to use. One of the first centerfires I purchased was a Seiko TRG 22, and they utilise a 2-stage trigger, and it was beautiful to use. And I believe some of the Hauer rifles these days are utilising a 2-stage trigger.
Yep.
It's one of those things. I think if you're used to using it, they're good, and if you've got a good one, they're good. If you've got one that's kind of mushy between the stages, it would be difficult.
That's that's true of most triggers. If they're that feeling, then they're not comfortable, they're not fun to use. I find anyway.
But I mean, they are pretty common, and a good 2-stage trigger, rather than a military type 2-stage trigger, is that's probably what most people comes to mind. Is that kind of military rifle, big, heavy. Long pull,
big long take up.
Yeah. And that's certainly not the case with the modern one. So no, I think you'd probably be quite happy with one.
Yeah, I guess from the 2-stage triggers I've used, they've been just enough of a take up, just so you can get your finger resting on the gun, so you're in position, ready to go, which makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
I've used a few Huber Concepts.
That's one I'd like to try. Yeah.
And they are very nice. I mean, they're not a cheap trigger, but you get what you pay for, and they've been fantastic triggers. So,
yeah, brilliant, nice. And I see Kestrel have redone a number of their products.
Yep.
With their 5700, which is their top end one, and their Sportsman one as well, and they both come with applied ballistics on them. There's no sort of other option within that category of them. And they've got that I'm not sure what it's called, link or some sort of link feature, which allows you to operate a tablet or a phone or anything like that and actually see what's happening. So you can stick your Kestrel a bit further, 100 feet down range or slightly off, or wherever you want it to be, to give you a good wind reading, and then sit there with your phone and monitor it in real time. which is probably a useful feature, particularly if you've got it on a weather vane. Then you can not only get your wind direction, but also your wind speed.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I haven't actually competed in a short-range bench rest competition, but those guys, if you see the array of wind flags and indicators they use, it's phenomenal.
Yep.
Whether something like that would be permitted or not. Again, if
I believe, and I'm happy to be corrected on this one, but I do believe that any electronic aids in terms of wind, that are out of the rule, are out of the game.
Yeah.
Because they did have guys use it, and they would set up arrays down the wind channel and get all monitored wind the whole way through, rather than the skill of reading the wind flag.
Yeah, and I guess that is a fairly big factor. I mean, in bench rest shooting, it's won or lost at thousandth of an inch kind of increments or less. So
any little advantage like that. Yeah. And then look, as that technology becomes more prevalent, who knows, the rules may need to change or whatever it is. But certainly, we're not here to discuss rules of bench rest. I'm sure there's other people who know far more about that than we.
Absolutely, yep. Probably could maybe watch some paint dry. Might be a little more interesting than discussing rules of bench rest. But another just again slightly off topic issue or product which I found, which I think looked very interesting for while we're on the F-class sort of vein, is Vortex have brought out a new scope which is fairly and squarely aimed at the F-class market. It's 15 to 60 by 52.
Yeah, right.
They call it the Golden Eagle.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a high magnification second focal plane scope.
Yep.
Very similar features to some of the March and Night Force high-end competition scopes.
Yes. Yep.
And getting some really, really favourable reviews, and price-wise is, shall we say, it's considerably less than its competition. So
yeah, okay.
It'd be interesting to see one of those in the flesh. I'm sure they will.
Didn't you just bag out bench rest, and now you're recommending a product?
No. This is F-class.
Oh, F-class. Sorry,
Yeah.
I clearly got that wrong.
Well, no, you wouldn't see too many variable powered scopes in bench rest just from the extra weight. Those guys want to put all their weight in their barrels. So
yeah, certainly. This is true, but I know some guys do.
Some guys do. You're right. But I mean, a lot of the time it's fixed power stuff. But no, for the F-class kind of applications, they tend to favour the high magnification scopes.
Yeah, well, that's it. If you can make the elevation, you may as well.
Yeah, and I mean it's often they're shooting at fixed known ranges, so they can utilise larger tapered rails if need be and that sort of thing. And I believe this particular Vortex scope had a good array of elevation in it. So
let's I've got it almost up on the screen. Let's have a look.
Yeah, and actually, while we're sort of looking at what you're scrolling through there, the Vortex have also got a new scope out, the Razor AMG series, which from what I understand is sort of the next evolution of their Razor series. So probably a little more applicable for the field tactical type shooting. But
yeah, we'll get onto that one. I'm just going to this Golden Eagle.
Mm-hmm. Certainly a good looking scope. It's exposed turrets, isn't it?
It's 55 minutes of elevation.
Yep.
So I guess for a dedicated F-class gun, that's probably adequate.
Yeah, if you had a 20-minute rail on your rifle as well, that would certainly take you out to the F-class ranges. So
yep.
I mean, that's what it's orientated for. So
it looks quite good, actually.
Yeah, and I follow fairly closely the Accurate Shooter Daily Bulletin, and they had a review on it, and it was reviewed very well. So certainly for the guys interested in that kind of form of shooting, could be definitely worth a look.
Absolutely. So this I've now got the AMG up there.
Yeah, this is it's a first focal plane scope. Definitely aimed more at the sort of the field tactical type market.
Yep. So it's 6 to 24 by 50.
Yep. And offhand,
and first focal plane.
Yeah, first focal plane. I'm not sure offhand whether it's a 34 or 30 mil tube, but it's clearly aimed. It's exposed turrets, zero stop.
30 mil tube.
30 mil. Yeah.
Yeah. With 96 minutes of elevation.
Yeah,
so it's in the ballpark there.
Yeah. So again, it'd be interesting to see one of these scopes in the flesh when they get here. I haven't heard of anybody that's got one here yet, but
no, not yet.
they will be coming.
Yeah,
Presumably,
no doubt. Guys here, I'm sure will be looking at them. Yeah.
So I guess, Sam, this probably kind of leads into.
Oh, I've got one other thing that I saw being announced at shot was the Schmidt Bender, the 545 by 56, which is their high power one.
Yep.
I mean, that's probably, from what I saw, going to be really expensive, as they usually are. But they're often regarded as the top of the game. Although in recent years, perhaps they've dropped off in their popularity comparative to some of the others. They've certainly still maintained a very good reputation.
Absolutely. I mean, they are commonly used by sort of military units and police and that sort of thing around the world. I mean, you don't get that unless you're good. So it's good to see, though, that they are actually bringing out new products and not resting on their laurels. So
yeah, always good to see new releases. So
it'd be interesting to see one of these Schmidts when they get sort of available here.
Yeah, that's perhaps not it's a 66 minutes of elevation, so it's probably more aimed at that F class. Is it more? I don't know. It's more aimed, perhaps not that really long range stuff. The comparative being the 100 minutes of angle to 120 minutes of angle adjustment scopes.
Yeah,
but it's got that higher magnification, so it's going to be a playoff between those two.
Well,
it always is.
A lot of the time, though, with the sort of the practical, tactical type shooting, the real high powered scopes, besides the lack of elevation they usually have, if you're trying to pick up a small target in a field environment with high magnification, it's a lot more difficult than if you're...
difficult, yeah. Well, I remember Jared's from the Practical Rifles series was talking about that last week, and he was saying he rarely runs his scope beyond, I'm going to get this wrong, I'm sure, but 12, 14 power, something along those lines, and it was a I'm going to get this all completely wrong, but it was a 24, 25, something along those sort of roads, maybe 30. But he said he keeps it pretty low, and I found the same thing when you were when we were running these practice sessions or this test on some of the courses the stages we've written. You quite comfortably run your scope on 13, 14, 15 power because you've got to be able to pick it up really quickly. You've got to be, you don't have to be. You got to hit or miss. It wasn't, not trying to shoot a group. Yeah,
and you also sort of not trying to finally, put a projectile in exactly the same hole. It's you find the target and you've got to hit it quickly, as quickly as you can. Now,
absolutely.
It's speed is of the essence as well as accuracy. Now, if you've got a good optic that's clear and focused and its resolution's good, on 12 to 15 power,
it's gonna be comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to shoot 1 centimetre squares at 500 metres, no. But if you're trying to shoot steel plates at those ranges, then yes, very different story.
Well and truly, it's going to do the job. So, I guess this sort of leads us in, and the AMG specifically leads us into a bunch of questions we've had recently about scopes. And we did a little bit of a podcast, sort of early days, or one of the earlier episodes about talking scopes. But we tried to cover a lot in that one episode. Which scopes is probably fair enough that there's a lot of information, and to try and break those down to individual categories is probably due to talk about one over an episode. And so one of the questions that I've been hit with a fair bit this last couple of weeks has been the difference between first focal plane and second focal plane, and why you would go one or the other, and when you would go one or the other.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common question. I think anybody sort of that has been in shooting for a long time seems to get asked, and it's a good one to ask. It's interesting. What I think with first focal plane scopes is it's only been in relatively recent times that there have been good, accessible, affordable first focal plane scopes available.
And they're becoming more and more so.
Yeah, and for the longest time, first focal plane scopes were so much more expensive than a second focal plane scope that most shooters would just go, well, why would I spend the extra $1,000 or more to have that feature? So, and they weren't really developed to the degree where they are now. And looking back at some of the earlier first focal plane scopes, reticle selection was really poor in them and that sort of thing.
Sure.
So I guess...
Well, perhaps we should clarify the difference between the two. I'm sure most guys will know, but for those who don't, so they can keep up with the convo, a second focal plane is what most people would be used to from a scope. The majority of scopes are going to be second focal plane. If you walk in and you buy yourself a Tasco 3-9 world class to put on your 22, it's going to be a second focal plane scope. And the easiest way to tell the difference is as you wind the magnification. If the reticle stays exactly how it was at 3 power as 9 power, you've got yourself a second focal plane. If the reticle increases in size and so you're seeing less of the reticle, but you're seeing it thicker and you're seeing it zoomed up, it is a first focal plane, and it's going to be in line with the magnification. And the benefit there of the first focal plane is that if you have got marks on your reticle, hash marks or mil dots or anything like that, they're going to be true on their measurements as you throughout the power range, whereas the second focal plane is only going to be true at a given power range.
Yeah, and I think this, we're talking about this, the style of shooting, this, the precision rifle series, practical type shooting, has really accelerated the growth of the first focal plane. Now that's, if you've got a scope which you're going to be dialing up and down and using the reticle to hold for wind or for moving targets and that sort of thing, it's almost a 100% necessity to use a first focal plane.
Yep.
Because you don't have to worry about what power your scope is on magnification wise, for those subtensions to be correct. So it's got its disadvantages as well, and I think one of the early disadvantages of the first focal plane was reticle choice.
Yeah, agreed.
Meant that, say you had a 3.5 to 15 or a 5 to 25 power scope.
Yep.
For the reticle to be sufficiently thin, I guess, to be usable at full power, it meant that if you wound it down to lowest power, the reticle became micro thin and basically almost not usable for the graduations on the reticle. So that was an issue that in recent years has been overcome with some of the new reticles out. Horus have got a whole bunch out, and the tremor reticles and that sort of thing have overcome that.
And even just the standard, the non-Horus, the factory sort of stuff. I think what I've seen more prevalent in reticles now is the floating dot in the middle. So it's a nice, fairly comfortable crosshair. But then they've got this gap around the center point with a dot in the center, and I've seen that across a number of different brands. And I guess one of the complaints often with first focal plane 5 or 10 years ago was as you zoomed up, you could almost cover your entire target and not be able to see it anymore. But by sort of hollowing out that crosshair and just putting an aiming mark in the center, it's enough that you can usually still see the outside of your target and put the dot on the center. Yeah,
and I guess its applications are important as far as a lot of the target shooting where they bench rest or F class where they're shooting really fine targets off and particularly bench rest type shooting where they're shooting for group.
Yeah. And shooting paper and small sort of areas. Yeah.
Closer range, but they really, as I said, it's won or lost at 3 decimal points of an inch. So if you were to use a first focal plane scope, the reticles, generally speaking, are too thick for that kind of application. However, if you're trying to shoot a 1 MOA or sized target, a gong at whatever range, that reticle will never cover it. It's probably a little coarser than the bench rest shooters would use, but I found it is a lot quicker. But again, so they certainly have their place. It's first focal plane scopes are not for everybody, but I would imagine,
and you still have to pay more for them. Generally speaking, in their like for like, they still are the more expensive option.
Well, they're, from what I understand, physically they are more work to build. They're a more complicated design to build in the way that the scope's put together.
Yeah.
So understandably they're going to be more expensive. But I guess for the guys that are relatively inexperienced and want to get into any sort of form of hunting or long range shooting, really, it's probably a really good option because it takes away. They don't have to consider. If they go, okay, I've got my drop table here and it says, 6 minutes of angle hold on whatever range. they don't have to worry about looking at where their scope is set. They can just hold on that reticle and know that it's going to be correct and true.
Yep.
Which, again, if you can take that variable out of the equation when you're under the pressure of hunting in particular, it's probably not a bad thing. I mean, there's not a lot. There are more scopes coming out. Like Bushnell have got some lower magnification range, like their 3 to 12 LRHS and 4.5 to 18 LRHS, which are...
And they're all first focal plane?
They are first focal plane, yep. And I believe Weaver have got a couple of tactical scopes out now.
Okay,
That
I've seen that.
Yeah, they're not the mega dollar ones. They're not up there with the Schmidt Bender price wise. They're sub $2,000 scopes.
Yep.
Which certainly puts it a lot more available than a $4,500 or $5,000 scope for the guys getting involved with the shooting. I think we had a look at some of the questions, and one of the guys that had written in said he had a budget of $2,500 or less.
Yep.
Preferably.
Yep.
And there are certainly options available now at that price point where he could get a really good quality optic that would do the job well for that. Yeah,
certainly. And one of the other questions was even a smaller budget. And look, I've been trying to find a scope that that I can recommend to guys that it's sort of under $1,000 that will do it. And I've really struggled to find a scope with the first focal plane option. I tried one on the weekend, and I won't name the brand yet because I gave it some tests, but there's more I want to do, and I've still got it for at least another week. So, and I'm happy to talk about it when I've given it a fair trial. I don't want to sort of do it, but that is a 5 to 25 by 56 scope, and it's in mil, the one I've got, with a decent reticle in first focal plane, and it's under $800. So the first session with it wasn't great. Optically, it's not impressive, and the dialing didn't match up to tried data I've had before. So I want to put it on paper on a tracking test to see what's happening there. But it really it didn't quite perform. But at $800, the problem is you go, well, for the price it's probably pretty good, but if it's not tracking well, it's wasted $800.
That's right.
The other scope I tried on the weekend was a Leopold 6 to 18 Mark AR, which is one of their sort of cheaper ones. Now, it's not first focal plane, it's second focal plane, but it was mil, and it tracked perfectly a couple of weeks ago when I tried it, and then we took it out to distance on Sunday, and it did really, really well. So and it repeatedly would go up and down, and shoot and put them on target when it needed to.
Yeah, look, for me, the mechanical reliability is the critical one.
Yep.
I mean, if you had a scope, a sub $1,000 scope that optically wasn't brilliant but was very reliable in its tracking, I would
deal with it, wouldn't you? Yeah.
So from that point alone, I mean, I would recommend somebody, if they had $1,000 to spend and no more, I'd recommend them to get a second focal plane scope of better quality.
Yep.
And deal with having to pay attention to where your magnification's set.
So if we were to say with second focal plane, because we've talked a reasonable amount about first focal plane, but second focal plane, if you are on a static range, you know your distance, and you're going to be at your highest magnification or a set magnification continually, and particularly if you're going to be dialing most of your stuff and you've got time, a second focal plane, there's no real disadvantage for that sort of thing, is there, in that application?
Absolutely not. I mean, a good number of the reticles that the F-class shooters like are really basic. Some of them are just a dot.
A dot, yeah.
And so they're not
tiny little thin.
Yeah, they're not utilising the reticle for anything other than
where to put
the actual aiming mark. Yeah, so for that application, there's zero benefit whatsoever of a first focal plane scope.
And I guess, so when when your first focal plane comes into its own is when you've got that, when you are relying on the reticle in some aspect for what it is you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And be that, and the one that we haven't probably talked about is to mill a target. So to use your reticle to actually work out the distance of a target, which we're certainly not going to cover now because that's quite complex in itself to get your head around. But to actually use the marks in a target of a relatively known size is very difficult to do with second focal plane. It's not impossible by any stretch, but it's a quicker, easier process through a first focal plane.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, look, a lot of just general sort of hunting scopes, with a basic duplex reticle, for example, most of the time, like for an average hunting application, they might be zeroed at 200 meters or yards, and guys will just go, there might be a pig or a deer at 300, so they go, okay, I'll just hold slightly higher, for example, and they're not actually using it sort of precisely. And there are ways and means of using basic reticles to give you more reference points. But for the average kind of hunting rifle, it's probably not super critical. But it is of benefit. If you've got a first focal plane scope and you know how to use it, guys that have gone and from a second focal plane to a first focal plane, a good one, often it's hard to go back.
Yeah, no, I'll certainly be in that category. I changed a number of scopes to first, and haven't looked back. I've still got a second focal plane scopes on lots of guns. It far outweighs my first, but for the particular guns, for a particular sort of application, they certainly have an advantage. Having said that, if you're gonna run it on your power that your reticle is calibrated for, you're not going to lose anything one way or the other. It's just when you need to dial back. And most people think, oh, well, I'm long range shooting, I'm going to be on my maximum power. As soon as it starts becoming practical shooting or the precision rifle style of shooting, the ability to dial back is beneficial, and the speed of using a reticle, particularly for your wind, but sometimes also for your holdovers, has its advantages.
Well, and the fact that Mirage can play a big part. Often,
true.
If you've got a 50 or a 60 power scope and you've got a heavy Mirage day, there's no way in the world you're going to be shooting it on 60 power. So there's other issues there that come into play as well. But so I guess it's one of those things. People say which is the better. It's just you can't simply answer that question.
No, you need more information to be able to make a recommendation.
I'd firstly ask, what do you want to do with it?
Yep.
And how much money have you got? I mean, that's as basic as it is. Because if they say I've got $2,000 or $3,000, it puts a lot of scopes out of the equation, so you don't even need to look at them. So, but again. Yeah,
if someone's sitting around that $1,000 mark, what would you say? Would it be better to go for a better quality scope and stay first focal plane, or try and get something stay second focal plane, or try and get something first that's perhaps loses something there?
I would say without any doubt, I would go with a better quality second focal plane every time. For years I used second focal plane scopes predominantly. Yeah, and I would take a higher quality second focal plane over a subpar quality first focal plane any day of the year. I mean, I have been frustrated sometimes with second focal plane scopes. I've missed a couple of shots on foxes
because you've been on the wrong magnification.
Yeah, you hold. So go, okay, I'll quickly look at your drop chart.
I reckon I remember that was the 32 power scope. Yeah,
and so you're quickly looking at your drop chart because you've got a fox that's not going to hang around. You hold on the wrong.
Yeah,
you hold on whatever you want it, and you go, well, that didn't go where I wanted it to, and then the fox is gone. So
actually, that's probably a good one to talk about. That was a 32 power, but on a second focal plane, it's not always the maximum power that it's aligned for. On that particular one, it was around 20 or 22.
22 power is what they're calibrated for. Yeah,
and so if you wound that all the way up, your reticle is no longer calibrated directly. But also, if you're using that particular scope spotlighting, so you're not necessarily getting the opportunity to stop exactly on 22 power, or you haven't got the light to work out which power you're meant to be on. So
for example, I mean, that particular scope, if one particular shot which I missed a fox, I can't recall the range offhand, but I'd ranged it and quickly looked at my drop chart, had the hold I needed, held on the reticle, and went way over the top of him.
Yep.
I'd basically given him way too much. Now, in the immediate, you're like, what the hell was that? But then I looked at the magnification. I was down around 12 or 14 power.
Yep.
So what that basically means was instead of the graduations on the reticle being, say, 2 minutes of angle, they might have subtended 3.5 or 4 minutes of angle. So I just held on the reticle and basically gave him double the elevation he needed. So
that way he went.
That's the kind of moment you go, if I had a first focal plane, he'd be dead.
But by the same token, it also raises the question of once again, always comes down to application. Is the right scope for application? And for me, when I'm spotlighting a 12 to 15 power scope has always served me very well, and that way I know I can just bump it up to full power, and my reticle is in line. And I've used a first focal plane scope for spotlighting a few times, but I didn't see the need because I sort of stayed on 15 power the entire time, and so I ended up going back to a second focal plane. Having
said that, I am aware of at least one of our listeners that probably shoots 2-3 times a week minimum.
Yep.
Shoots probably more foxes than most people I know.
I've ever seen. Yeah.
Yeah, and he likes the more power he can get, the better.
And I'm absolutely not saying anything's particularly wrong with it. I'm just, if you know what your application is and you know how you should go about shooting
absolutely,
then you make it work for you. And I'm guessing I know the guy you're talking about. And yeah, I've shot with him, and he's been had his scope on 24 power, and for some reason he can pick up a fox from a standing position to dropping on a ute, and be on that fox within seconds. Whereas I'm still trying to work out if I'm looking through the right end of the scope at that time.
That's familiarity with your equipment, and
it's
just you've got everything set up perfect. So when you get down behind it, there's no moving around to find your reticle. It's just right there,
dead in line. Yeah, absolutely.
So
that was a good night though. I think we got something 50 odd foxes that night. But anyway, that's another story for another day.
So, I guess. As far as people listening that may have the questions regarding scope suitability and choice and selection, if they've got specific questions, by all means, certainly ask them. Get the questions into us, because it's pretty hard to cover all applications.
Yeah, certainly.
You might get 10 guys asking you a similar question that are using their rifles in a different manner. So it's a little bit hard to cover all of them, but.
Yeah, but I think we've been now talking about first focal plane for 20 minutes or something, 25 minutes, and it's often glossed over in terms of should you go first or second, and always go first or always go second, or you should work out your application, just do it that way. But I think it's often people don't necessarily walk away from that discussion knowing a bit more. I don't know. We'll find out if they're going to walk away from this one knowing a lot more, but. Perhaps it's worth padding out, and I know the other question that we do get a lot is MOA better or is Milradian better? And I'm sure we shall save that one for another podcast. It's not for now, because the short answer is no, neither one's better. And once again, it's application and what you're used to. But anyway, we'll save all those answers for another discussion, because it'd be good to flesh out what is the difference and where they came from and why we would use one or the other. So, can you think anything more about first or second focal planes, perhaps?
I think we've sort of fairly well covered
what we know, anyway.
And it's not rocket science, really. It's both have their applications, and it's quite easy to explain how they work.
Yep.
And again, like anything, if you are very familiar with one or the other, you'll be better with it. I know guys that have never used a first focal plane scope, but they're really good shooters still. So
yeah, certainly.
It's I would say almost exclusively the military utilise first focal plane, but they've got reason for that. They often moving targets and that sort of thing.
Time's pretty critical in that application.
Yeah, and they don't have time to go, okay, what magnification am I on? They just need to be able to look through it and go straight away. So,
I guess that's one other thing that we haven't perhaps covered is having a second focal plane and using it on an odd power is still very possible, but they've now introduced an additional step in the process to work out. So if you were originally on 22 power, and that's where it's like your scope previously we talked about, and you were sitting there on 11 power, obviously rather than lining up to 1 MOA, your distance is going to line up to 2 MOA.
Yeah, I've seen multiple occasions where when we've, more just for, mucking around and really seeing how far people can stretch their rifle out to.
Yeah.
Guys that have been shooting sort of over a mile with a 308, for example, the elevation you require to do that. I've seen guys max out the elevation dialing
on the dial, yep.
And they might have a scope that might have, say, 20 minutes of elevation in the reticle at the nominal range of, say, 22 power at the maximum of that particular scope.
Yep.
They've backed it down to, say, 11 power.
And that's turned into 40.
Yep. But, I mean, it's all give and take, because then your image is appearing at half the size that it would at 22 power. So,
that's exactly right.
But it's allowed them to do it. So,
yeah. And it's possible. And if you know that you are, I guess if you were spotlighting, for example, and you knew which power you were on, you could make a relatively quick assessment as to what my reticle is going to be behaving like now, and still utilise a second focal plane in the same way you would at first. You've just got an additional equation to put into it.
Yeah, and I mean, I know a lot of guys that use, say, in the 5 to 25 power range, second focal plane scopes for spotlighting, and they'll locate the target, the fox or rabbit or whatever it might be, at the lower power, and then dial it up. Yeah. So if they do need to hold on the reticle, then it's going to be true. So
yeah, absolutely. And then I know guys who just dial, who just be whatever power they want, they dial, and therefore it's relatively irrelevant.
Yeah, absolutely.
So certainly to say, I guess in conclusion, one is not necessarily better than the other. It's always about your application, and if you're going to be sitting if you're not necessarily using your reticle, or you're happy to do that extra calculation, if you're going to be in a situation where you're not on the power your scope is calibrated for, then a second focal plane, and particularly if you're going to save some money, it's going to be worthwhile. But if you're in a situation where you're perhaps pressed for time and you want to make your decisions quickly, and you rely on your reticle either for elevation or wind or both, then a second focal plane is going to come into first focal plane is going to come into its own quite significantly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seems fair.
Yeah, I think that kind of covers it pretty well.
So if anyone's got other experiences with either of those options, or if there's some third focal plane that we've never heard of, let us know about it. That would be very interesting to hear. But we'd love to hear your experiences and what you've done. And hopefully the guys who have asked some questions, this will help you out to clarify at least this part of the topic as well. And I'm sure in a future episode we will talk about some of the other aspects of scope, and one being MIL and MOA. Out of curiosity, Andrew, you generally use MOA or MIL?
Currently MIL, but I've started and spent most of my shooting career on MOA because that was the predominant thing. Yep. But I've gone to MIL, and I've got reason for that, which again we'll go into.
That's it. I was just trying. I thought you might be still on. I thought you might be on MOA, which I reckon Greg and Dan both use MIL, as do I. Perhaps we have to get someone in to talk from the. I guess we all started probably on MOA. Well, I did certainly, and you did.
Yeah, and I think it's again we'll go into it in finer detail.
We're jumping ahead of things,
yes,
anyway, we'll leave that for another episode, guys. So thank you very much for listening, and please, as we talked about, check out the comp this weekend coming, the Victorian Practical Rifles series. Just to put a date on it, so if you listen to this afterwards, that is on the 13th of March 2016. Check that out, and thanks very much for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for listening to the Precision Shooting Podcast. To continue the discussion, check out our Facebook page, and for more information, head to our website, www.precisionshootingpodcast.com.au. This episode was brought to you by Impact Dynamics, advanced training for the precision shooter.